Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Village School by Miss Reed. Chapter 5, First Impressions. In their adjoining cottages at Tyler's Row, the two new pupils at Fairacre School were safely in bed, but not yet asleep. Jimmy Waits lay on his lumpy flock mattress in a big brass bedstead which had once been his grandmother's. It had been the pride of her heart, and she had slept in it as a bride and until her death. The brass knobs at each corner and the little ones across the head and foot of the bed had been polished so often that they were loose. His grandmother had told Jimmy that when she was a young woman she had tied a fresh blue bow at each bedpost, and the sides had been decently draped in white starched valances reaching to the floor. The edges of these she had crimped with a goffering iron. With a patchwork quilt on top, the bed must have been a thing of great beauty. These refinements had long since passed away. The remains of the patchwork quilt were still in use as an ironing cloth, but the bows and valances had vanished. Even so, Jimmy was very proud of the brass bedstead. In one of the loose knobs he kept his treasures, a very old piece of chewing gum, a glass marble, and a number of leather discs which he had secretly cut from the flock mattress. This operation had in part contributed to the general lumpiness. Kathy shared this bed with him on the landing bedroom. The stairs came straight up from the living room to this room of theirs, and it was inclined to be draughty. A small window gave what light it could, but an old pear tree growing too close against the side of the house spread its branches too near to allow much illumination. In the summer, the light filtered through its thick green foliage and gave a curiously underwater effect to the room as the shadows wavered against the walls. In the winter, the skinny branches tapped and scraped the glass like bony, questing fingers, and Jimmy buried his head under the clothes to muffle his terror. His two older sisters slept downstairs, where they had to be up first, and were out of the house and waiting at the top of the road for the first bus to Caxley at 7 each morning. His father and mother slept in the only other bedroom that opened out on the landing and was situated over the living room. Until recently, Jimmy had slept with them in his cot in the corner, but this he had now outgrown, and so he had been promoted to the brass bedstead. When one of his sisters married, which was to be this summer, the remaining one would probably be taken with Kathy in his grandmother's bed, would probably take his place with Kathy in grandmother's bed, and he would have to sleep downstairs on the sofa. He did not like the idea of sleeping in a room of his own, and resolutely put this fear from him at nights, determined to enjoy his present comforts. As he lay there, sucking his thumb, drifting between sleeping and waking, the sights and sounds and smells of his first day at school crowded thick upon him. He saw the orderly rows of desks. Some of them, including his own, had a 12-inch square carved onto the lid, and he had enjoyed rubbing his fat forefinger along the grooves. He remembered Miss Clare's soft voice, her big handbag, and the little bottle of scent which she had taken from it. The top had rolled away toward the door, and he had run to pick it up for her. She had dabbed a drop of cold scent into his palm for payment, but its fragrance had soon been lost in the ball of plasticine, which he pummeled and rolled into buttons and marbles and, best of all, a long, sinuous snake. He remembered the feel of it in his hand, dead but horribly writhing as he swung it to and fro. Holding his stub of chalk when he had tried to copy his letters from the blackboard had not been so pleasurable. His fingers had clenched so tightly that they had ached. He remembered the clatter of the milk bottles when the children returned them to the steel crate in the corner. He had enjoyed his milk largely because he had drunk it through a straw, and this was new to him. It was gratifying to see the milk sink lower and lower in the bottle, and to feel the cold liquid trickling down in his stomach. He sighed and wriggled down more closely into the lumpy mattress. Yes, he liked school. He'd have milk tomorrow with a straw, and play with plasticine snakes, and perhaps go and see Kathy again in the next room. He was glad Kathy was there too. School was all very nice, but there was nothing quite like home, where everything was old and familiar. Still sucking his thumb, Jimmy fell asleep. Next door, Joseph Coggs lay on a decrepit camp bed and listened to his parents talking downstairs. Their voices carried clearly up the stairs to the landing bedroom, and he knew that his father was angry. 9 pence a day? Lot of nonsense. Pay 4 bob a week near enough for Joe's dinners alone? Not likely. You give him a bit of bread and cheese same as you gives me, girl. Arthur Coggs also went on the early bus to Caxley. He was employed as an unskilled laborer with a building firm, and he spent his days mixing cement, carrying buckets, and wheeling barrows. At 12 o'clock, he sat down with his mates to eat the bread and cheese and sometimes a raw onion which his wife had packed for him. Joseph knew those packed dinners by sight, thick slabs of bread smeared with margarine and an unappetizing hunk of dry cheese, and his spirits drooped at the thought of having to take such victuals to school, and worse still, of having to eat them within sight and smell of the luscious food such as he had enjoyed that day. Beside his own bed, so close he could touch the gray army blanket that covered it, was an iron bedstead containing his 2 younger sisters. They slept soundly, their matted heads close together on the striped ticking of a dirty pillow which boasted no such effete nonsense as a pillow slip. Their small pink mouths were half open, and they snored gently. Next door, in his parents' bedroom, he could hear the baby whimpering. He was devoted to this youngest child and suffered dreadfully in sympathy when it cried. Its small red fists and bawling mouth affected him deeply, and he would do anything to appease its wants. He wished his mother would let him hold it more often, but she was impatient of his offers to help and pushed him out of her way. "Mind now," he heard his father shout. "You do as I say. He can pay for what he's had, but you put him up something the same as me." To Joseph, listening aloft, these were sad words. For although he too had dwelt on the new experiences of a day, as had the boy next door, and though the plasticine, milk bottles, desks, and children had all made their lasting impression on his young mind, it was the dinner, warm and plentiful, the plums, and most of all those 3 swimming platefuls of golden custard, that had meant most to young Joseph Coggs. 2 fat tears coursed down his face as, philosophically, he turned on his creaking bed and settled down to sleep. Mr. and Mrs. Moffat were making a rug together, one at each end. It was an intricate pattern of roses in a basket on a black background. It was designed to lie before the shiny tiled fireplace of the small drawing room, which was Mrs. Moffat's new joy. When they had lived above their shop in Caxley, she had thought long and often about the furnishing of a drawing room when she should have such a luxury, and she had cut out of the women's magazines that she loved many pictures and diagrams of suggested layouts for such rooms, as well as actual photographs of film stars' apartments. If she had had her real wish, she would have had a tiger skin as a hearth rug, but she realized that her present drawing room, which was only 12 feet by 10, would be hopelessly dwarfed by this extravagance, and that dream was put away with the others. As their hooks flashed in and out of the canvas, Mr. Moffat inquired about his daughter's debut at the village school. "She didn't say much," said Mrs. Moffat, "and she kept her clothes nice and clean. She's sitting by Anne someone or other. Her mother works up at the Atomic." "I know her dad. Nice chap he is. Works for Heath, the farmer. I met him at the pub." "Well, that's something. I don't want Linda picking up anything. Those ringlets take enough time without anything else." "She'll pick up nothing from that family she didn't ought," replied Mr. Moffat shortly. "Won't hurt her to rough it a bit. You make a sissy of her." Mrs. Moffat went pink. She realized the rough truth of this remark, but resented the fact that all her striving and ambition for their only daughter should go unrecognized and simply be dismissed as feminine vanity. It was more than that, but how to express it was beyond her powers. She relapsed into hurt silence. If it hadn't been for her efforts, they would still have been living over that poky shop, she thought to herself. She wanted Linda to have a better chance than she had had herself. She wanted her daughter to have all the things that she had wanted so dreadfully herself when she was young. a dance frock with a full skirt and ruched bodice, a handbag to go with each change of clothes. She wanted Linda to join a tennis club, perhaps even to go riding in immaculate jodhpurs and a hard hat. What Mrs. Moffat's fierce maternal love ignored was the fact that Linda might be very well content without these social trappings that meant so much to her mother. Mr. Moffat sensed that he had upset his wife again. In silence, they thrust the wool through the canvas, and Mr. Moffat thought, not for the first time, what kittle-cattle women were. Linda, in her new pale blue bed in the little back bedroom, was thinking about her new friend Anne. It was a pity she was so untidy. Her mother would mind about that if she invited her to play one Saturday, but nevertheless she would do so. She liked this new school. The children had admired her frock and red shoes, and she realized that she could queen it here far more easily than at the little private school which she had attended in Caxley. There had been too many other mothers of the same caliber as Mrs. Moffat there, all vying with each other in dressing up their children and exhorting them to speak in refined voices. It had been an effort, Linda realized now, all the time. At the village school, despite her mother's warnings, she knew that she would be able to relax in the other children's company. The thing that worried Linda most as she looked back upon her first day at school was the lavatories. She was appalled at this primitive sanitation. Caxley had had main drainage, and her own new bathroom at the bungalow was fitted with a water closet. She had never before come across a bucket-type lavatory, and the memory of her first few minutes there in that morning, with her nose firmly pressed into her hands, which smelt of lavender soap, made her shudder. She made a mental note that she would sprinkle toilet water on her handkerchief tomorrow against the perils of the day, and while she was debating which of her two minute bottles, lavender or carnation, she would use, she dropped into sudden sleep. While Miss Clare and I were enjoying our tea one morning at the schoolhouse, the telephone rang. It was Mr. Annet's high-pitched voice that assaulted my ear with a torrent of words. He is the schoolmaster at Beech Green, a quick, impatient man, a widower living with an old Scotch housekeeper in the schoolhouse there. He had only been married for 6 months when his young wife was killed in an air raid at Bristol, near where his London school had been evacuated. Very soon afterwards, he had sold most of their possessions and taken the little headship at Beech Green. He spends his life fighting a long, losing battle against the country child's slowness of wits and leisurely tempo of progress. He is also the choir master of St. Patrick's. "Look here," he gabbled, "it's about the Harvest Festival. Mrs. Pratt can't get along to play the organ tonight. One of the children's down with chicken pox, and I wondered if you could step in. We want to practice the anthem, 'The Valley Stands So Thick with Corn.' Do you know it? You must do. We've had it every Harvest Festival since the war ended, and they still don't know it." There was a sound of a scuffle at the end of the telephone. "Well, get out of the way, you fool!" shouted Mr. Annett, exasperated. "No, not you, of course, Miss Reed. The cat. Well, can you? At 7:30? Thanks. I'll see you then." The telephone dropped with a clatter, and I could imagine Mr. Annett sprinting on to the next job, quivering with nervous energy. I finished my tea, reviewing the evening's work before me. One thing, I was certain of plenty entertainment. Chapter 6. Choir Practice. The heavy church door groaned open, and the chill odor, a mixture of musty hymn books and brass polish, greeted me as I tiptoed down the shining aisle for choir practice. Mr. Annett was already there, flitting about the chancel from one side to the other, putting out copies of the anthem for all the world like an agitated wren. His fingers flicked to his mouth and back to his papers as he separated them impatiently. Good evening. This is good of you. Anyone in sight? No sense of time, these people. Nearly 1:30 now. Enough to drive you mad." His words jerked out as he darted breathlessly about. A leaflet fluttered down to the hideous Lawson-patterned carpet which covers the chancel floor. As he was scrabbling it up wildly, we heard the sound of country voices at the door, and a little knot of people entered. Mr. Willett and his wife were there, 2 or 3 of my older pupils, looking sheepish at seeing me in unusual settings, and Mrs. Pringle brought up the rear. Mrs. Pringle's booming contralto voice tends to drown the rest of the choir with its peculiarly strong carrying quality. As her note reading is far from accurate and she resents any sort of correction, Mrs. Pringle is rather more of a liability than an asset to St. Patrick's Church Choir. But her aggressive piety, expressing itself in the deepest genuflections, the most military sharp turns to the east, and the raising of eyes to the chancel roof, is an example to the fidgety choir boys, and Mr. Annett bears with her mannerisms with commendable fortitude. I went through to the vestry to see if Eric, my organ blower, was at his post. The vestry was warm and homely. The table was covered with a red serge cloth with a fringe of baubles. On it stood a massive ink bottle containing an inch of ink which had dried to the consistency of honey. Leaning negligently against the table was Eric, looking unpleasantly grubby, and blowing gum bubbles from his mouth in a placid way. "For pity's sake, Eric," I protested, "not in here, please." He turned pink, gobbled, and then, to my consternation, gave an enormous gulp, eyes bulging. "Gone," he announced with relief. "I didn't intend you to swallow it, Eric," I began, while dreadful visions of acute internal pains, ambulances, distracted parents, and awful recriminations crowded upon me. "It don't hurt you," Eric reassured me. "I often eats it. Gives you hiccups sometimes, that's all." Shaken, I returned to the organ and set out the music. 4 or 5 more choir members had arrived, and Mr. Annett was fidgeting to begin. Snatches of conversation drifted over to me. "But a guinea, mark you, just for killing an old pig." "Ah, but you got all that meat and lard and that. Look, I knows you has to keep it all the year, and a guinea do seem a lot, I'll own up, but still—" "Well, well," broke in Mr. Annett's staccato voice, "shall we make a start?" "Young Mrs. Pickett says to tell you she's along presently, but she's got the baby down. He's been a bit poorly." This piece of news started a fresh burst of comment, while Mr. Annett raised and lowered himself impatiently on his toes. "Poor little crow. Teeth, I don't wonder. She called in the nurse. Funny that. I seen her only this morning up at the shop." Mr. Annett's patience snapped suddenly. He rattled his baton on the reading desk and flashed his eyes. "Please, please, I'm afraid we must begin without Mrs. Pickett. Ready, Miss Reed? 1, 2, we were off. Behind me the voices rose and fell, Mrs. Pringle's concentrated lowing vying with Mrs. Willett's nasal soprano. Mrs. Willett clings to her notes so cloyingly that she is usually half a bar behind the rest. Her voice has that penetrating and lugubrious quality found in female singers' rendering of "Abide with Me" outside public houses on Saturday nights. She has a tendency to overemphasize the final consonants and draw out the vowels to such excruciating lengths, and all this executed with such devilish shrillness that every nerve is set jangling. This evening, Mrs. Willett's time lag was worse even than usual. Mr. Annett called a halt. "This," he pleaded, "is a cheerful, lively piece of music. The valleys, we are told, laugh and sing. Lightly, please. Let it trip. Let it be merry. Miss Reed, could you play it again?" As trippingly and nimbly as I could, I obliged, watching Mr. Annett's back nodding in the mirror above the organ. The tuft of his double crown flicked half a beat behind the rest of his head. "Once more," he commanded, and obediently the heavy, measured tones dragged forth, Mr. Annett's baton beating a brisk but independent rhythm. Suddenly he flung his hands up and gave a slight scream. The choir slowed to a ragged halt, and pained glances were exchanged. Mrs. Pringle's mouth was buttoned into its most disapproving lines, and even Mr. Willett's stolid countenance was faintly perturbed. The time!" shouted Mr. Annett, baton pounding on the desk. "Listen again." He gesticulated menacingly at my mirror, and I played it again. "You hear it? It goes, 'They dance, bong, bong. They sing, bong, bong. They dance, bong, and sing, bong, bong.' It's as simple as that, now with me." With his hair on end and his eyes gleaming dangerously, Mr. Annett led them once more into action. Gallantly they battled on. Mr. Annett straining like an eager puppy at the leash, while the slow voices rolled steadily along behind. The lights had been put on in the chancel, but the rest of the church was cavernous and shadowy, making an age-old backcloth, aloof and beautiful, for this 1 hour's rustic comedy. On the wall of the chancel stood the marble bust of Sir Charles Dagbury, once lord of the manor of this parish, staring with sightless eyes across the scene. On each side of his proud, disdainful face fell symmetrical cascades of curls, and his nostrils were curved as though with distaste for the rude mortals busking below. The furious tapping of Mr. Annett's baton broke the spell. "David," he said to the smallest choir boy, "get up on a hassock, child. Your head's hardly showing." "But I'm up on one, sir," protested David, looking aggrieved. Sorry. Never met such badly designed choir stalls in my life," announced Mr. Annett, with the fine disregard of the townsman for the dangers this sort of remark incurs. "Much too tall, and hideous at that." There was a sharp hiss as Mrs. Pringle drew an outraged breath. "My old grandfather," she began heavily, "though a trying old gentleman at the last, and should by rights have gone to the infirmary, such a dance as he led his poor wife, was as fine a carpenter as you could wish to meet in a day's march, and these choir stalls here," she leant forward menacingly and slapped one of them with a substantial hand, "these here very choir stalls was reckoned one of his best bits of work. Ain't that right?" she demanded of her abashed neighbors. There were awkward mutterings and shufflings. Mr. Annett had the grace to flush and look ashamed. "I do apologize, Mrs. Pringle," he said handsomely. "I meant no offense to the craftsmen who made these choir stalls. First-class work, obviously. It was the design I was criticizing." "My grandfather," boomed Mrs. Pringle with awful intensity, "designed them too." "I can only apologize again," said Mr. Annett, "and hope that you will forgive my unfortunate remarks." He coughed nervously. "Well, to continue. Next Sunday we shall have 'Pleasant are thy courts above,' and I thought we'd try the descant in the second verse only. Agreeable?" There was a murmur of assent from all except Mr. Willett, who had a somewhat Calvinistic attitude to church affairs. "I likes to hear a hymn sung straightforward myself," he said, blowing out his tobacco-stained mustache. "These fiddle-faddles takes your mind off the words, I reckon." "I'm sorry to hear you think so," said Mr. Annett. "What's the general feeling?" He looked round at the company, baton stuck through his hair. Nobody answered, as nobody wanted to fall out with either Mr. Willett or Mr. Annett. In the silence, Eric could be heard creaking about in the vestry. There was suddenly a shattering hiccup. "Then we'll carry on," said Mr. Annett, jerked back to life by this explosion. "Descant verse 2 only, the psalms we've practiced, and, oh yes, before I forget, we'll have the sevenfold Amen at the end of the service." Mr. Willett snorted and muttered heavily under his mustache. "Well, what now?" snapped Mr. Annett irritably. "What's the objection to the sevenfold Amen?" "Popish," said Mr. Willett, puffing out the mustache. "I'm a plain man, Mr. Annett, a plain man that's been brought up God-fearing, and to praise the Lord in a bit of respectable music is one thing, but sevenfold amens is taking it too far to my way of thinking. And my wife here," he said, rounding fiercely on the shrinking Mrs. Willett, "agrees with me, don't you?" he added, thrusting his face belligerently to hers. "Yes, dear," said Mrs. Willett faintly. "It's a pity," began Mr. Annett, "and while we're at it," continued Mr. Willett loudly, brushing aside this interruption, "what's become of them copies of the hymn books done in atomic sulfur?" Mr. Annett looked bewildered, as well he might. "You know the ones, green covers they had, with the music and atomic sulfur written just above. I'm used to 'em. We was all taught atomic sulfur years ago at the village school, when schoolin' was schoolin', I may say, and all us folk my age gets on best with it." "I believe they are in a box in the vestry," said Mr. Annett, pulling himself together. "And of course you can use the copies with tonic sulfa if you prefer them. They'd become rather shabby, which is why the vicar put them on one side." Mr. Willett, having had his say, was now prepared to be mollified and grunted accordingly. Mr. Annett began to shovel music back into his case. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Next week at the same time, good evening, everybody. Yes, I think the anthem will go splendidly on the day. Good night, good night. They drifted away into the shadows of the church, past the empty pews, the font, and the memorial tablets and tombs of their forefathers. Quietness came flooding back again. I locked the organ and went out to the vestry. Eric, glistening from his exertions, was still struggling with recalcitrant hiccups, but seemed otherwise in excellent health. Mr. Annett was giving him a shilling for his labors. "And if you buy any more of that horrible gum," I told him, "eat it at home. If I see any in school, it goes into the waste-paper basket, my boy." Grinning cheerfully, he clattered off down the vestry steps, and we followed him into the soft evening air. The choir members were gossiping at the church gate, hidden from us by the angle of the wall. Their voices floated clearly across the graveyard. "I believes in speaking my mind," Mr. Willett was saying firmly. "Speak the truth and shame the devil. There's plenty of sense in that. That young Annett 'd have us daubed with incense like ancient Britons if he had his way." "'Tis nothing to do with him, incense and that. 'Tis the vicar's job, and he's all right," asserted a woman's voice. Mrs. Pringle had the last word. "I trounced him proper about my grandpa. What if he was a sore trial at times? He was my own flesh and blood, wasn't he? Fair makes me boil to hear him spoke of so low." The booming voice died away as the footsteps grew fainter and fainter on the flinty road. I can hardly wait for Sunday. We'll continue this next time.